literally nothing has changed about my work life. I'm in the
Hmm.
same place. I have the same audience. The audience doesn't like some of what I have to say or some of the new conclusions I've come to. And so I wanted to kind of set the record straight about what I have personally experienced. I don't know what my political labels are at this point, right? Because I feel like I don't really fit anywhere. And that's just full honesty. It's, again, very uncomfortable for me. And I want to say that out of any point in my adult life, this is probably the point where I'm the most malleable and open to new information because of what I've experienced over the last few years. If anything, I just feel a responsibility to kind of correct what I got wrong in the past to the best of my ability and just do better moving forward. It just became abundantly clear to me that where I was getting my information, and I'm not just talking about like, independent lefty outlets. I'm talking about like legacy media outlets, right?
Hmm.
A lot of them, it's not that they report misinformation, it's that they omit details of the story that
Right.
would, maybe the additional details of the story don't change your mind at all, right? But it's not up to them to decide that. Like, we should know every detail. I think the Amy Cooper story is another example. It was fairly recently I came across Camille Foster's very in-depth investigation into that story, and there were so many details of that story that were intentionally omitted or left out of the legacy media reporting of it. And that painted a picture in my mind and in the minds of many others that, there's no justification for the way that she was, panicking when she was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, right? But then you get this, then you find out, based on what Camille Foster had found out and reported, was that like she didn't have good cell reception. So the person on the other end of that conversation couldn't hear her. She was panicking because she
Hmm.
genuinely thought that she was at risk after, here's another thing that was omitted in a lot of the reports, after she was literally threatened by the bird watcher, right? Who said,
Right.
if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, and you're not going to like it. And then he proceeds to try to lure her dog to him. And listen,
Yeah. Yeah.
you might still feel that her behavior was uncalled for, whatever. That's up to you. But you should know all those details. And I will say, from my personal opinion, if I'm alone at a park and some random guy tries to lure my dog away from me, I'm gonna freak out. Like, I just am. And so, okay, with the Rittenhouse story, I was gonna cover the trial and I just needed to go back and just like really, really look at all of the details and remember all the details. So when I do the story, I get the facts right. And then as I'm doing that, I come across a New York Times video. And this was a really, really well done video that they posted on YouTube that showed you in slow motion, like how everything transpired that night.
Hmm.
And once you see it for yourself, it's really, really difficult to argue that in those moments he was not acting in self defense. So
Right.
once I saw all those details, first of all, I had to convey them to my audience and be honest about what the reality was. The other thing was, there was a lot of misreporting about how Kyle Rittenhouse was in possession of an illegal weapon and that he crossed state lines with that illegal
Oh
weapon.
no.
Okay.
Yep.
So that was a lie. And it's not a lie that I just made up in my mind, right? That was how it was reported initially, which is why I would mention the state lines, but not because, oh, how dare he cross state lines? Anyone in this country has the right to cross state lines. It was because it was reported that he was in possession of an illegal gun
Right.
and he traveled across state lines with an illegal gun, which is a serious charge. But it turned out that he did not travel across state lines with that
Yeah, he
weapon. He
didn't do
actually,
that. Yeah, the weapon
right,
was in the area already. Yeah.
exactly. He bought it from a friend when he was already in Wisconsin.
Hmm.
That was a pivotal moment for me because, again, misinforming the audience is not something I have any interest in. And I might give them the facts and they might not like it, but I can't withhold information from them because I'm afraid that they might not like it. So I'm going to give
Hmm.
them the facts. But, I've learned to be better about, first of all, the sources I trust. I make an effort to just be cognizant of the filter bubbles we all exist in, the filter bubbles I exist in. And I've broken through that bubble a little bit to, look at other sources that I typically wouldn't have looked at. So that was one of the pivotal moments. But
Hmm.
honestly, I would say it everything for me started when I started getting gaslit on the crime wave. And it's really interesting to talk about these various political issues in the abstract. But then once you personally experience something and once you see something happening in the country with your own two eyes, and your political side is incessantly gaslighting you on it, it makes you question, well, what else are you guys lying about? Or what else are you guys gaslighting about? And that's what happened. So, you know, during the pandemic, there was absolutely a crime wave in the country, mostly in like major cities. Los Angeles happened to be one of them. And I also started opening up about, you know, just what the statistics were indicating in regard to crime and how it's obviously having a negative impact on all communities, but mostly the communities that like BLM and leftists claim to care so much about, the disadvantaged communities. You know, crime on the metro system in LA has been unbelievable. And the majority of people who take the metro, who take buses and public transportation, they're usually like immigrant workers. They're usually, you know, blue collar workers who, you know, don't have enough money to buy a car, for instance. And so I was like, why are you guys cool with just having these people deal with this kind of violence? There was like a phase last year where people were literally being set on fire randomly on buses. And that would get no attention, no news coverage, and it would infuriate me. And so when I opened up about what happened to me in my own neighborhood, what I thought was telling was how everyone, not everyone, but some people accuse me of pushing racist stereotypes. But I had never, ever disclosed the race of these two individuals, ever.
Yeah.
But they just assumed that these two guys were Black. They weren't Black, they were two white guys. But like, I never shared that publicly because I didn't think the race really mattered, right? What actually happened mattered. And I thought the reaction to it by the people who were supposed to allegedly want dignity for everyone reacted to it. Like, that really bothered me. So that was the beginning of it. I would say that's what started me questioning everything and wanting to like look deeper into everything. And then other things happened. Then there was the attacks on straight news journalists who were doing their jobs. For instance, when Li Fong was reporting on the BLM protests, when he was accurately reporting on the BLM protests and some of the violence that took place during those protests, his own colleagues at The Intercept tried to paint him as a racist. I've known Li Fong for many, many years, since I started working at TYT. Guy doesn't have a racist bone in his body. For them to paint him in that way, I thought was disgusting, and it had a chilling effect, right? The whole point is to intimidate journalists from doing accurate reporting on what's actually occurring on the ground. Then there was what happened to Jesse Singal, which I found disgusting. I didn't know about that until at some point this year. I would say earlier this year.
With the trans stuff? Jesse's been on the show before. Yeah, he's done great.
Jesse Singal is a good faith, I think, critical thinker. I'm subscribed to Blocked and Reported. I have listened to endless podcast episodes from Blocked and Reported. I haven't seen anything from Jesse Singal that communicates to me that he is a transphobe, that he is a bad person. He did straight news reporting on basically what, you know, some of the risks could be when it comes to transitioning literal kids with puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. And through his reporting, which I'm very sad to say I didn't really come across until this year, I learned that I was wrong about a bunch of other things, right? So for instance, it is a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases, they are not, and they can cause irreparable harm. And look, you might think, okay, but you got to do a balancing act. And if a child or if a teenager has severe gender dysphoria, and it would actually be better for that person to go on puberty blocks. Okay, I mean, we should be able to balance that out. But my point here is withholding the information because you don't like the information getting out there ain't the way to go, because that destroys any opportunity for us to actually have a good faith debate about what we should do moving forward. What are the pros and cons? So there's that, you know, all of this stuff it started adding up. And through listening to Blocked and Reported, I found out I got a lot of stories wrong as well. Rebecca Jones ended up being a liar and a grifter. And
Oh
I wouldn't
yeah.
have known that. I wouldn't have known that had I not, opened my mind up to other voices
Rebecca
that
Jones was the one that went after DeSantis, right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And she's a complete liar. And we uplifted her, we enabled her, and I feel disgusting that we did that. So I issued a retraction and a correction on that story. I mean, look, that leftist mafia stream was unbelievable to me. Like the accusations that were thrown out there, Olay implying that I'm racist because as a woman, I don't want to be called a birthing person. Like that has, I mean, race didn't come up at all until she brought it up. And then she was the only one on that stream who brought race into it and like made it abundantly clear that she's got an issue with white women and just thinks they're all the same and like, whatever. And then after I basically called her out on it, she's like, "Oh, you're attacking me and only me because I'm black." And it's like, no, you're the only one in that
Attacking
group
you.
of
Yeah.
people who attack me and accuse me of being racist because I personally want to be called a woman. So, I mean, I'm not going to apologize for it because context matters, intention matters, and what people like Olay are trying to do is erase all of that, right?
Yeah.
To make
Right.
it seem as though intention is totally irrelevant, context is totally irrelevant. If she says someone's racist, then by definition that person is racist. End of story. Period. And I just disagree. I also disagree with racism of all sorts, right? So I find it disgusting when people make generalizations about black people or migrants or any group. Why would I somehow be okay making generalizations about white women or white people, right? So I find it gross and divisive. And look, at the center of all of this is I've been doing this shit for like 17 years and things have gotten worse. And I just don't think whatever strategy the left thinks they're engaging in is an effective strategy. I think it's actually caused more harm than good. I think their rhetoric and their discourse is a lot of times ignorant of the facts. And I think that they go around accusing people of doing things that they themselves engage in. And I was part of that too. I'm trying to do better moving forward. But a lot of people are going to look at this and think, oh, well, then that means she's a right winger. Whatever. You can call me whatever you want. I don't care what you label me as. But
just not birthing person.
Don't call me a birthing person. A person with a uterus. Yeah, exactly.
I don't blame you at all. So
yeah. I don't know. I don't know what my labels are at this point
Right.
because I don't fit in anywhere. I feel like all of these issues are way more complicated than the way they're being portrayed in partisan media. And so what I want to do is actually understand those complexities. But here's the other thing. Understand the other side in good faith, okay? Because I think that there are some stereotypes that the left has kind of bought into about what the arguments are on the other side. And, it doesn't make us sharper to misrepresent what the other side is actually saying. It actually makes us weaker. If you understand what their arguments are, it'll then allow you to reflect on what your own weaknesses might be in regard to the arguments that you're making. And so, and then one other thing, and this was an unexpected outcome that I was talking to my husband about just last night. I've been a lot happier lately, like a lot happier. And I think it's because once you actually, and look, I want to make the distinction and like draw out a caveat. I'm not talking about like far right, like militia members. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about just mainstream conservatives, Republicans, whatever. Once you actually understand what their arguments are or where they're coming from, it's a lot more difficult to be hyperbolic about things, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of start seeing the world around you for what it really is. And there's a certain amount of fear that kind of starts to dissipate, a certain amount of like hyperbolic thinking that starts to go away. And you start to see things a lot more clearly. And the world isn't as messed up as people would have you believe. And that's a good thing. Now, some people might get super offended at me saying that because they've completely bought into the hyperbolic thinking and they think the world's coming to an end. And there are terrible things happening. I don't want to minimize that, but we need to be realistic about what's actually transpiring in the country. And for areas where we need improvement or different policy solutions, we should actually have good faith debates about it and come up with those solutions. And I think that the current discourse is standing in the way of that. And that's the other thing. I mean, I think that the left has completely, and they'll deny this, but I mean, just go to Twitter right now. They've like abandoned economic policies and instead hyper focused on incredibly divisive, like identity related issues, right?
Yeah.
And and like their take is always, oh, well, the other side wants us they're racist, that's why. They're transphobic, that's why. And it's like, no, you got to do more than that. So if you're going to, if you're going to refute what they're saying, then actually address the points they're making. And if you're not going to do that, you're going to come out looking incredibly weak and childish. Look, I don't want to be part of the problem. I don't want to add to this toxic discourse that does nothing to improve anyone's life. And I feel like I've been engaging in that and I feel embarrassed about it. And that's really where I'm coming from. I want to get people healthcare. I want to get people housing. Those are the issues that matter. Let's put healthcare aside for a second, because here's the other thing. The far left will push ideas that are not popular with the general public, right?
Yes.
So I think that protecting, marginalized communities, protecting the transgender community is important. However, when you move out of or move far away from making sure that they are not denied housing, making sure that they're not denied healthcare, when you move into like these more fringe areas of like, I mean, there was a story out of the UK this week, blows my mind. There was an LGBTQ group in the UK who suggested that instead of referring to vaginas as vaginas because it might be offensive to transgender men, one of the potential replacements or substitutes could be bonus hole.
Oh no.
Bonus hole?
Yeah, bonus hole.
Okay.
And listen, people don't like this stuff, okay? They might not be on Twitter talking about how much they dislike this stuff, but on average, every normie woman I've talked to is like, I can't stand this stuff, right? Honestly, I'm at a point where I want to be a little more pragmatic because I want to accomplish something. I want to improve people's lives, as much as we possibly can. And when you have a maximalist approach, you're less likely to make that happen and you turn a lot of people off. Because they're in this like echo chamber on Twitter, I think they're under the assumption that most Americans agree with them. I think most Americans want a mixed economy. We're currently a mixed economy. I definitely want to socialize healthcare. That's like the area that I would say I'm the furthest left. But I don't agree with the nihilism. I never have. I don't agree with burning down our institutions because they're inherently racist or they're inherently this or that. I think that some institutions could use reform. I was totally on board for reforming policing. I was never once on board. I never once called for abolishing police. And so the abolish movement, I think, is insane. And I think the fact that I'm willing to say that has led to a lot of people hating me. And I don't care at all.
The thing that's kind of frightening to me is people saying that the goal of colorblindness is either not likely, impossible, or not even desirable. And to me, that's a drastic shift. Like, okay, I understand you want to do things to get there, but the goal should still be kind of this liberal notion of colorblindness at the end of the day.
Well, I would posit this question. When the culture wanted colorblindness, when that was like I guess, in general, the agreed upon goal, I feel like race relations were better, like much better
I agree.
than they are today, right? Yes. So look, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I'm a little scared I'm afraid of like talking to people who are outside of my race because I don't know if I'm going to unintentionally step in it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's, and I hate that. Right. Like there's this like, I don't know, it's like frigid, because like if all of the message is toward me and people who, I'm Armenian, but still they call me white passing. So, just got to go with that, right? If people who look like me are constantly told you are inherently racist, Okay, you are inherently a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that's the start, and I had this debate with Cenk when it came to our rhetoric in regard to the other side, right? If the starting off point is you are trash and we think you're evil,
Yeah,
then
totally.
how does that, you're never going to move in a better direction. You're not going to move the country in a better direction. You're not going to improve race relations. You're going to make it worse. And that is what I see happening. I think a lot of the division is due to the backlash to that kind of rhetoric. And I think that, look, I think racism exists for sure. Do I think the majority of white people are racist? Do I think white people are inherently racist? No, I do not. I think that's crazy. Right. I bought into that narrative hook, line, and sinker, right? Like the narrative of they want to erase any curriculum, any teachings about racism,
Yes.
about slavery, about the Jim Crow era. And I feel like a sucker, right? I just do. And
Right.
yeah, and I don't know. Like, look, I can't control others. All I can do is control my own behavior. And so I've been kind of thinking of things through that lens.
That situation though is like detractors. I'm talking about like in a work environment, like which would be much worse, obviously.
Right. Well, so
So
far,
that's
no one's,
okay. Go
so
ahead.
far, no one's approached me. No one's approached me to tell me like, I can't believe you're saying this, or, you know, I can't, you know, I'm very angry at you. No one's done that.
Okay.
However, two people have reported me to HR. So
What?
Yeah.
What? You're already getting reports
something
to
specific
HR?
or just a general?
My tweet saying that I'd like to be referred to, that I personally would like to be referred to as a woman and not a birthing person,
Wow.
that upset some people, and they reported me to HR. I'm happy to report that HR's response was, she didn't do anything wrong. So, you know, she can't get in trouble for sharing her opinion on this. Look, this is hyperbolic talk, so I want to like make sure I mention that before I say it, but I keep telling, I've told Cenk on multiple occasions, I'm like, I feel like I just woke up and got out of a cult, right? Because it's a little bit, it is a little bit cultish, and I don't think it's literally a cult, but I think what happens is exact, like the dynamics that you just described is
right.
exactly right. And you know, people are scared. Like we as humans, we thrive in our social groups, and we need to have that social group in order. Like it's just how we evolved. And so I get it. I understand the mentality behind it. But there were certain things going on in my personal life that I'm very grateful for, because it didn't keep me grounded enough, but at least kept me grounded to the point where I had a way of seeing the other side to some extent. So I'll tell you a few examples. Like my husband's Cuban. He is not like a, you know, conservative Cuban guy. In fact, he was pretty apolitical when we met. He's become more politicized as we've been together, but nonetheless, his family, hardcore Republicans. Like they just are, you know? And at first, like in 2016, when we got married, I remember I would get into like these super uncomfortable fights and debates with them. And I was just like, I had in my mind, like all of these made up ideas of what they believed. And finally, I just decided, look, I love my husband. I don't want to like put him in an awkward position of like having his wife constantly in conflicts with his family. So let me just calm down and just try to understand where they're coming from. And then what I started to do was, instead of like challenging them, whenever they would talk about something like healthcare, for instance, so they think everything Democrats do is like
socialism.
By definition, like they're all socialists, they're all communists,
right.
they're all, you know.
Right.
And I look, considering the trauma they experienced, I get where they're coming from in that regard. But you know, I wanted to kind of like convince them that's not the case. So instead of being combative, when we were talking about healthcare, for instance, it was hilarious because one of his family members accidentally admitted that when she was pregnant and she had to go on Medicaid, that it was the best healthcare she's ever had, right?
Oh no.
And like, look, instead of going like, aha, I gotcha, right? Like, you know, antagonizing her for it,
right.
I was like, you know what, you make a really good point. Like, you know, free at the point of service, you know, and I'm just trying to get her to absorb and really fully understand what she just said, right? And so I think there's a way to talk to people. I think there's a way to find common ground. There was this actress, I always forget her name, but she's beautiful. She's in that show, that HBO show about rich people vacationing. White Lotus, the first season of White Lotus. There's this one actress who had posted photos of her mother's birthday on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And in that photo, or in the series of photos she posted, you could see family members in the back wearing like MAGA hats. And the amount of backlash this actress received was intense.
Wow.
And they were mad at her for refusing to condemn and cut off her family members.
Ridiculous.
And I was like, no, you don't do that. Like, how do you think you're gonna win politically by doing that?
Right.
By like segregating people based on their political ideology.
Yeah.
The way that we come to conclusions or agreements or policies that could actually work to improve people's lives is by engaging in these conversations in good faith. And yes, obviously, considering the fact that not everyone agrees, you do have to compromise on certain things. But improving things, you know, maybe it's not going to be exactly what you want, but improving things is still improving things. And the idea that you should just cut anyone off if they don't agree with you 100% runs counter to building the broad coalitions necessary to accomplish some of these policies.
Yeah.
And so I just see all of that I just see it clearly now. And again, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So like my whole theory of change is so different today versus what it was in like even 2016. Well, that's the thing. That's funny because that really resonates with me. I definitely don't see myself on the right.
Right.
But I don't know. Again, I just really want to reiterate, I don't fit in anywhere at this point. Like, I don't think there's really a label that perfectly describes me. And to be quite honest, I think attaching myself to a label limits me. It limits my ability to like really think about each individual issue critically and carefully. And that's I think that's really important, to have a more accurate perspective of the world around you. You can take some of the injustices in the world or in the country you live in and have that inform every decision you make and have that impact your mentality in regard to what you can and can't accomplish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think to some extent, and I haven't fully formed an opinion on this, right? It's just something that I'm leaning toward and I want to explore it more. I'm a little bit concerned that the left, and at this point I'm talking about the left broadly, I'm a little concerned that the messaging that they've engaged in for quite some time now toward the Black community is to some extent insulting toward them and infantilizing toward them and stereotypical. So like, it was kind of jarring to me in the whole affirmative action debate. And there seems to be this like weird agreement that I don't agree to, that like, oh my God, if we don't have affirmative action, you know, Black people could never get into colleges or universities.
Yeah, that's so bad.
And I just don't like, I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way. Sometimes I'm worried that the messaging, the hyperbolic messaging, because think about it, if you're told over and over again, this country's unfair, you're never going to make it, you're never going to make it, why even try? Why even try? Like, and I'm worried that that disempowers people. So I don't know. It's something that I want to explore more. I want to understand more. Maybe there are some sociologists that have like studied this and researched this. And if you guys have any recommendations, I'd love to read it. I think what they're doing is they're pivoting to the culture wars in lieu of focusing on the economic issues, where I think that there is, I wouldn't say exact agreement, but there is definitely more agreement and increasingly more agreement between Democrats and Republicans on these economic issues. And I think part of the reason why the culture wars are front and center and getting worse every election cycle is that in an effort to differentiate themselves from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party has leaned into the culture wars more and more, I think to the detriment of the country to a large extent. And so, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw after what happened with, you know, the George Floyd murder, you have Democratic leadership kneeling in kente cloths and stuff like that. And it's just, that is at this point, that is what they lean into for their campaigning. Like when you look at LBJ, for instance, he was strategic in getting the Civil Rights, Act passed. Like he he knew how to use carrots and sticks. And I want to see more of that from the Democratic Party on behalf of their voters, on behalf of the economic issues that their voters care about. I'd like them to kind of step back from the culture wars a little bit and kind of get their heads right about what's actually transpiring in the country, as opposed to feeding into the hyperbolic narratives. I think they've been doing that more and more, and I have an issue with that. Look, at the end of the day, people want to be able to make decisions about their own bodies, about their own lives. You know, another area where, you know, I think that there was a lot of misinformation was about what it would mean if someone refuses to get vaccinated with the coronavirus vaccine. I mean, look, at first it was like, oh, you got to get vaccinated because it's going to stop the spread. But then they admitted it's not going to stop the spread. And so, look, people should be able to make decisions about their own lives and their own bodies, unless there is a very real and proven public safety or public health concern, right? And the way they sold it was, you must get vaccinated because if you don't, you know, you're going to harm other people. I think to some extent the jury's out on that. And I got to a point where I was like, listen, as long as me and my family are vaccinated, we're going to be all right. I'm done with this debate.
Yeah.
It's stupid. Yeah. And so that's just to give you another example of the majority of Americans actually do love freedom. They do love to make decisions about their own bodies. They want to make decisions about intimate decisions about their own families and family structure. I don't think it's helpful that there's like an increasing number of school districts in blue states that are trying to cut parents out of the conversation if their children identify as transgender. I think it's really important for the parents to be part of that conversation.
We're right at about 3 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of your time. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was, I'm not going to lie, I was like a little bit terrified before coming on.
Were you really? Oh man, I was telling Sitch I was a little nervous too, but
yeah,
I
don't know.
This was great. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are super friendly, and thank you for, you know, the opportunity to talk to you and your audience, and I hope they enjoyed it. And yeah, keep it up.
You're
getting a lot of love in our super chats, I see. So
awesome.
You'll have to let us know what the fallout is, because I'm like, it's torturous to think that, you know, you can't be honest in this day and age. So I mean, I really commend what you're doing here, and I feel completely sincere with us, which is just, I mean, it's a breath of fresh air, obviously, in this political environment. So thank you.
Thanks for that support, and I'll keep that in mind as the fallout happens. So I could like stay strong.